Welcome to Enjoy the Journey podcast, where we interview expert entrepreneurs and thought leaders to help guide you in pursuit of financial freedom. Presented to you by Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and Sam Panetta, the Money Man, where we help service-based business owners remove cash flow bottlenecks, maximize their profits, and turn business profits into personal wealth. G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another expert masterclass. And I'm very excited today because I've got another new friend from the BX network, Rasti from Get Rare Property Investors. Now, Rasti is a buyer's agent, and he's a very successful property investor himself. And I wanted to get an opportunity to have him on the podcast so we can talk a little bit about his wealth journey, how he got involved in property, how he used his skill set to be able to amass a significant property portfolio, and then how that led into him becoming a property expert and advisor to help clients make the same decisions to help them achieve the same success that he has. So really looking forward to diving into that today with you. So Rusty, thanks for joining us, mate. How's things?
Thank you, Jackson. Really very much appreciate to be here. Now, things are very good. Very good.
That's great to hear.
Take care.
We're in interesting times, right? So I'm really interested in having a conversation with you around your wealth journey, because I think why this conversation is so important is that there are a lot of people out there at the moment that are sitting on the fence. They don't know what to do when it comes to property. Should they wait? Should they buy? Should they sell? You and I both know what we should do. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to educate them and help them make better decisions. So let's start at the beginning, Rusty. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got started in property.
Sure. Look, I have always been passionate about properties. I'm an architect, a qualified architect. I studied 5 years architecture from a passion or from a love for properties. And the reason is that, to me, it's an ultimate culmination of the education in the humankind, as it in terms of science, when it comes to engineering part, or the arts in terms of the form and function that we talk about. So I enrolled myself in 5 years degree course, loved it, enjoyed it. Due to some circumstances of my family, I had to change my career. But that love actually continued and got me interested in properties as an investor. And to me, it's one of the few asset classes that lots of wealthy people have actually used to build their wealth. So it was more of an afterthought or an after, I realized that, this is the skill that I already have being an architect, that I can realize the potential of the property in terms of understanding the attributes. Because people think that property is brick and mortar. But for me, it's about people, 100%. The sentiment. Like it's the investor, like who's or maybe the person who's living in there, or the investor who's trying to find the tenant. Like the whole property investing is about sentiment. Nobody knows how to value a property. It's about who is the buyer who will pay that price. So there's a lot of research, a lot of science that goes around it. Continuing on, when I realized that it is something that I can actually leverage in terms of my skill set, I became actually a financial investor as a portfolio manager.
Okay,
I learned, like in my last career, I was actually a portfolio manager. I started with researching the market, but primarily more from the equities side of things. So which stock should the person be investing in? Now, that is the science by itself. Like people do lots of valuation models, whether it is a DCF, discounted cash flow, or comparable sales, the ratios and whatnot. So, and then at the same time, there's a lot of science behind it, like a mathematical equations, like modeling, financial modeling that we call it, to use that science to figure out what to invest in.
Sure.
So from my perspective, I use that financial modeling, which we use in $1 trillion market, in the investment properties market side of things.
Wow. Okay. That's very unique, Rusty, because I think that there's I'd probably say there's two types of buyer's agents, or I guess property experts. There's those that understand the fundamentals and use this kind of these methodologies to understand real intrinsic value. And then I guess there are more the agents who are more qualitative, right? It's all about the people aspect. And it seems to me that you're making a blend of the two.
100%. We can find a very good company, but doesn't really mean it's a good investment.
Sure.
It's on those lines. Any property is not really a good property unless it makes a good investment as well. So when it comes to investment, it's the component of making money out of it. But when it is coming as buying a property to live in, then the sentiment part plays a critical role. Not that
Makes
it's not
perfect
important
sense.
otherwise as well, but it just becomes critical.
So, with this kind of CFA experience of being a financial analyst, when did the penny drop that you could use that skill set to research property for yourself?
Like, I've been investing in properties even before I became a CFA. So it was my passion for making money work harder for you.
Sure.
Coming from a very humble beginnings, and my parents actually worked very hard. And I realized that they work very hard, but they don't really know what to do with the savings. So I realized this is a typical thing. Like people are so busy in making money in whatever they're doing. They're specialists in that, like they're good at it. But how do they go about parking the money? So
Mm,
to me, I think it's a book that I read, which every people might have heard about it or might have read it. Rich Dad Poor Dad
sure.
by Robert
Robert
Kiyosaki.
Kiyosaki, yeah.
So he was a turning point for me to think in terms of, okay, what is asset, what is liability for a household balance sheet.
Sure.
And from there, I realized that, okay, I'm employed, can be self-employed, can be an investor or a business owner. So I very quickly switched from employee to an investor.
Yeah.
And in property came very naturally to me for a few reasons.
Fantastic. Great. So, talk me through the process that you followed as you were building your portfolio to do your due diligence, to do this research. How did you approach that, Rusty?
I'm, I actually take a very scientific way of doing things. And to me, because my previous career, I was actually an IT manager. So looking at a lot of databases, looking at enterprise solutions for the financial institutions. And also I learned about the CFA thing early on, like how people are doing it. And then I also realized that I read the statistics that more than 90% people in property investing can only actually end up only holding only one or two properties.
Yeah. Wow.
But then only less than 1% of the property investors hold six or more properties. So
Wow.
for me, idea was that, okay, clearly statistics says that not every property investor is a successful investor.
Yeah.
So for me, I actually started my journey with education. I thought like maybe let me understand how successful people are doing it.
Mm,
And I spent, I mean, not really, I would say spent, I would say I invested in myself, in my own education,
yeah.
understanding from the property gurus out there, understanding the theories, what they're saying. And more importantly, the network, the proximity is power.
Sure.
Understanding what other person is doing, I can learn from them. I don't really have to commit my own mistake. I can use theirs.
Of course.
So understanding, coming with that kind of background, with that kind of open mindset, I started learning. And to answer you directly, the way I go about researching the property is understanding the fundamentals on the macro level,
Mm,
looking at things like supply and demand, vacancy rates, and there are quite a few indicators that we can work it out, like say, for example, days in market, discount rates. And on top of that, like it's a very quantitative way of doing things for me to identify out of 15,000 plus suburbs in Australia, where should I go?
sure.
Finding out those regions, those suburbs, then it's a question of finding that relationship with the local real estate agents. Nobody knows better than the local real estate agent what sells, at what price it should sell, and what's the real valuation.
Sure.
Of course, there's no such thing in real valuation in property market,
No,
in my
I
opinion.
agree. Yeah.
It's more about all you need is two people passionate about a property bidding in an auction.
Exactly.
So using those kind of understanding of the macro, then having a local knowledge, understanding which suburb, which street, which property, and then again doing a lot of comparative study around it.
Okay.
Like people rely somehow, I don't even know why, but they rely a lot on the median pricing of that suburb.
Sure. It
To
doesn't tell
me,
us that much, does it?
no, it's not. It's to me, it's very misleading.
Mm,
Like so, for example, in a suburb, very quickly, if the suburb has two types of properties, like new and old. New
excuse it.
properties, it's a skews altogether. And then median is basically something in middle.
Sure.
And then people think that, oh, I'm buying a value because median is this much, and though I'm buying an old property. So for that reason, what I tend to do is like I find the comparable sales in that area, comparable listings in the area, and then go attribute by attribute.
Great.
My scientist behind me, the IT engineer behind me, tend to put about 80, 100 properties which are comparable and trying to look attribute by attribute. So kind of running more of a model, like what we call it as a factor model.
Yeah.
Like giving attributes of property. For example, it has a swimming pool. It is renovated bathroom. There's a what type of ceiling it is, what type of flooring it is, what type of the condition, what is the condition of the property, what is the land size of the, whether it is facing, like what sort of direction and what sort of proximity to the main hubs of transportation, like train station or highway or just a neighborhood like a precinct, kind of shopping center. So working out, then I would actually run through my system and would realize that, okay, the value of that factor as in a renovated bathroom or unrenovated bathroom, what is the exact dollar figure to $100,
Wow.
and like in hundreds. And then I would say, okay, this is how it is going for mathematically. And then when I'm finding our property, it has all these attributes. They kind of work it out. Okay, if it is a good thing, then I will give a premium to it
Sure.
for that factor value. And if it is more of a lower value or lower aspect of that attribute, then I would give a penalty to it.
Okay.
So based on that, I do a valuation. Then I would know the closest guesstimate. I would still call a guesstimate,
Sure.
To work out what should be the value. In my opinion, that property is being priced by looking at other comparable sales.
Wow. That's a very, very robust process, Rusty. And look, I think for anybody who's listening to this, and myself included, who has time to do that? And I think that this is where we see your mums and dads or first-time property investors who go to, say, a handful of open homes. They open up the cupboards, they look at the hot water system, they check out the bathroom, they look over the neighbour's fence to see if they've got chickens or something that makes too much noise. Most people's investigations when it comes to property are superficial.
Look, the thing is that I wonder like what they're looking for. I mean, superficial or direct, like, like it's so, I mean, they might be very quick in what they're doing. One of the stats which I was looking at, according to ME Bank survey in 2018, 58% of the people spend less than 60 minutes before they exchange the property contract.
That's scary. The most
Right?
significant
Less than
financial
60
decision.
minutes. I know. And also, to me, it's also about the opportunity cost, as in like not investing in the better property. I mean,
Sure.
maybe they get lucky, or they do, or like they have been told rightly so by the friends and family. I mean, I'm not really saying all the time herd behavior is a wrong behavior.
No.
You might be lucky, but the question is, do you really want to be lucky, or you really want to be very much determined to succeed?
Yeah, we see this a lot, Rusty, and I think that a lot of people have the fear of missing out, right? And I think I've seen a lot of people that try and rush in and buy a cheap property in maybe a regional or a subpar area that just has no upwards pressure, and that property is never going to grow. And it's never going to perform in line with other opportunities where if they even just saved an extra $20,000 or $30,000 deposit to allow them to get to that next stage of property in a better area, they'd be far more successful as a result. And I think that's a big risk, right? That's the reason why the statistics show that there's a lot of people who don't own more than one property.
That's right. So to me, I have nothing against the regional town as long as it is supported by the fundamentals.
Sure.
If we know there's a highway coming up, or there's certainly there's a population boom. Like the reason why I believed in housing or the property market, at least in Australia for that matter, is that we really need, or the government really needs, young professionals to support the aging population and the debt that we are actually accruing over the period of time. We have no choice but to keep inviting foreigners.
They've got to import those people.
You know what? Once they come, they work, there's an income tax. The family will be there, they become a part of the expenditure. So this is what we need. So that's what the government is so much worried about, the immigration policy.
Sure.
Like they really need to keep it consistent. Yes, there's a COVID-19 right now, the effects that we have. Yes, the international borders are shut down, but question is like, are they shut down for only short term or long term? We can't afford to have long-term closure.
No.
We really need to open up, or maybe we have to have a big boost eventually to catch up on the loss of the population growth. To me, that actually defines that, okay, the population will be growing. So there are quite a few fundamental reasons why there will be an increase in the household number.
Hmm.
Not only the population is increasing, but also the average household size, as per the last statistics which I looked at, is 1.75.
Okay.
So 1.75 people living in one home. So effectively, 35 members living in 20 homes.
Sure.
And that number is decreasing.
Okay. So then that means that the dwelling that your person is going to want over, say, the next decade is probably going to change. Would you agree?
Exactly right. That's a trend which we are seeing. And even if you look at people around us, like 20 years, 30 years ago, there was a concept of joint family,
Sure.
kids living longer,
Yeah.
people having more kids as well.
Of
But
course.
now it's a bit more disintegrated for some reasons.
Makes sense. Okay. So let's talk about, and I guess one of the things I really like about your value proposition, Rusty, is that you talk very openly about your own investment experience. And I think that there are a lot of experts out there that don't necessarily practice what they preach. They say one thing and they do another. So you mentioned a lot that you got a lot of mentorship and you tried to follow people who were successful in property. So what was the best piece of advice that you've ever got around property?
I think it's the advice that actually I would say the most valuable is more holistic when it comes to investments,
Sure.
not just property, if I may share that. And that is to have a end goal in mind.
Mm.
Because every investment, whether it is property or share, whatever it is, it comes with its due risk around it.
Of course.
When we are talking about expected return, there's a risk. So from the investment world, which I have practiced in my investment journey as well as a portfolio manager, it's a risk return or combination that we have to look at. So it's risk adjusted return.
Yep.
So once we know what is our goal, then we can work towards it.
Sure.
It's never linear. Even our journey is never linear. It has to be strategic. So I actually take more of a financial planning approach as a consultant. Like I have nothing to sell as a short list of properties that if Jackson, if you come yourself that, okay, Rusty, buy me a property, I have to really sit down with you to understand what is your existing portfolio,
Yep.
what is your aspiration, what is your risk appetite, what's your capability, and then the comfort that how far you can go, because lots of people think they have to buy in their neighborhood, in their backyard, So understanding all those aspects, because see, at the end of the day, like if I'm buying a property for you, then you have to be comfortable not only with the property, but also the process.
Sure.
So I take more of an education approach, making you feel that, not really feel, but rather making you understand it's your decision. I'm just a consultant with you, working with you, for you.
Fantastic. And I think that's so important. I find many people mistake investments and treat it as if it's the destination itself. An investment is just a vehicle to get you where you want to go.
Exactly
And
right.
once again, if you don't have a measure of where you're going, should you buy a unit? Should you buy a house? Should you buy a commercial property? Should you develop? There's an infinite amount of options. But if you know what you're trying to achieve, it makes it a whole lot easier to reduce the shortlist, right?
Exactly right. And the thing is that it will be more appropriate for you, for your circumstances.
Sure.
So, just talking about the destination, I'm a big fan of stories, and this is the story that I picked from my mother early on in my childhood. And the story goes very quickly like that there was a young elephant, baby elephant, tied down to a tree with a very thin rope. He tried to break the shackle, couldn't really break it. Another week, few weeks he tried, then he realized that, okay, he can't get out of it. Now, few years later on, that's an adult elephant with lots of energy, lots of power, yet tied down to the same feeble rope because he forgot about it, that it can actually break it. That's not a story about the elephant, it's a story about us.
Mm.
Because when we were young, we had lots of passion that this is what I really want to do, And then we got into the life of making money, just making enough to meet our goals.
Yeah.
And then we forgot about passion. It's like, yes, in childhood, we dreamt about it, we thought about it. And I was thinking, the other day, like I'm actually very much in touch with my friend, like my childhood friends, and they're still very dear to me. And probably because of the reason that we have shared very openly our dreams with them.
Sure.
And, so the point I'm trying to make is or this is what I actually do for people, like asking them what they really desire. If there's no constraint, no restriction, what would you do today? But and then the question is why you're not doing it today.
Exactly. I think this is really important, mate. I think you're right. And most people life has a habit of beating us down, right? And getting us just to compromise. And I think the whole idea of building wealth is about thinking abundantly. How can you create opportunities, freedoms, flexibilities that allow you to live the life that you really want?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And on the flip side of that, Rusty, I think there's a lot of cowboys out there in the property industry, unfortunately. And for that reason, I think it's our duty to make sure that we not only help people make the right decisions, but we help them move away from the wrong decisions. So
So
what's
true. So true.
so what's been the kind of the horror stories that you've heard when it comes to property that people should potentially steer clear of?
A very good question. Very good question. I think the way the remuneration is attached to a new property of the planned property,
Mm,
a plan, an apartment, like to me, I can't really make any sense of the planned property. But because the remuneration is so much attached to those kind of properties, that there's a lot of salesmanship around it.
yeah,
And they associate somehow. I mean, I'm not really saying every property is bad. It comes down to risk, return, and appropriateness for the individual.
sure.
But to me, because there's so much of remuneration around it, people tend to go build the trust somehow, and then are successful in selling that property.
Mm,
And to your point, because it's a fear of missing out. To me, it's a survivor bias.
sure.
If it is successfully that if I bought of the planned property and I made money because giving just by 5% or 10% or even just signing a contract on a $1 and waiting for 3 years or 2 years, if I made huge amount of money, I'll be on the top of the hill shouting, look, this is what I've done. Mr. X helped me to buy that property.
Yeah,
And look, here I am today. Hearing that story in the barbecues or wherever, other people around that person might be inclined to buy something similar with or without that kind of research behind it.
yeah,
So that's my take, like
I
that's the
agree.
biggest challenge. Like, how do we build that trust? And somehow the challenge is we ourselves as an expert in the industry, we can't really predict to exact percentage
Sure.
point that it will grow more or less.
Of
When
course.
it comes to sentiment, even a bad stock in the financial markets can really too hard, and we take a risk of being laughed at. Rusty, you said this, and look what happened.
Mm,
To me, it's all probabilistic model.
yeah,
It's more the likelihood of our stock or our property to do better than the other one, given the circumstances, given the likelihood of success or failure. It's like taking a chance, like not really looking at the rear mirror, not looking in front, and just swimming the car around.
mm,
If I made it much quicker than someone going all the way straight to a roundabout, taking a turn, and then coming back.
sure.
To me, that's the kind of analogy that I would take on those lines.
Makes perfect sense, mate. So, and I guess there's a lot of people out there that are maybe a little bit concerned about what might happen. Obviously, we've gone through this unprecedented situation. I don't think we've seen the end of it from an economic standpoint. I think we've got a pretty long journey still to come.
Sure.
Obviously, had the COVID-19 situation. We've had our first recession that's been announced in almost 30 years. But I guess the other consideration is that interest rates are at all-time lows and not indicated to go anywhere for any time soon. So when you talk about, I guess, that risk premium that we were talking about before, people really don't have an option if they want to make money than to invest in property or shares. So what's your view on what the property market will do in Australia, say over the next few years?
So if you look at the history, share market and properties have done very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar. Like to me, it's actually a myth to say that, it's probably wrong on my part to say that property doubles in every 7 to 10 years. That's a myth, because we are generalizing the Australia as one market.
Sure.
But as you know, it's a market within markets. Like It's a heterogeneous market.
Yep.
So first of all, it's very specific about the property. I can buy a lemon, it might not go forward, it might go actually backwards,
Sure.
but at the same time, I might get a very good purchase, because we make money in property market the way we call it. We make money when we buy it, on the contrary that people think otherwise, because we can find the property at a good level and then getting a discount at it. If that discount is not available, look for other property. So that is general. I'm saying for an individual property, that
Sure.
it really comes down to the research and the valuation that we actually buy the property at. But if I talk about one Australian market, yes, to your point, interest rates are so low. There's a talk going on that it might be negative for some time just to boost the economy.
Mm.
Fundamentally, we know nothing has changed. Long term, we still need people. Like they really need roof on their head,
Of
and
course.
all we are seeing is it might be a small dwelling or a smaller dwelling, less number of people living, but the household count, as I was saying before, is actually saying that there's a need for the property market to as a supply, as in there will be demand. Now with this COVID-19, actually, what's happening is that not many developers are coming to the party to bring their approvals. They have only what they've done is they have delayed them.
Sure.
So there's a challenge to the supply side. Demand will come back. It's just on a hold for now, just because people go with the sentiment. What they read in the media, they're basing their decisions on that. So to me, any seller who's trying to sell in the market, if they can hold that idea of selling, should hold off. And the buyers who are cashed up should really take advantage of those properties out there, because to me, it's a zero-sum game. If
Sure.
somebody is selling something at a discount, it's a buyer's gain. So in general, overall market, as a economist in this area, I would say long term we are in a very good spot to buy properties now. But at the same time, they have to be the right properties, the right research, not just buying any property anyhow or anywhere. And the history is the truth around it. Like when the market actually always grow. Also, the other thing is that we are not that very volatile as a property market compared to other risky. I mean, property market is still risky, but the risky component is because of its illiquidity or the size of the investment.
Yeah.
Not because it just moves up and down very much.
Yeah.
Like Sydney market, we know came down few percentage point, but after 60-65% rise, I'm happy to let go of that 10% or so, even.
Sure.
Just because it brings the stability in the market.
Yeah.
So long run, like we are at a very good spot with the low interest rate, population increasing, challenges to the supply side, decrease in terms of household number. So there is a huge demand, just that we need to be strategic, because there's an element of risk that if this situation is bad, before it gets better, it can go worse.
Makes
So
sense.
thinking about the appetite of an individual, we really have to do the research to get the right property.
Yeah, makes sense. And look, I think the biggest thing, my view is always accumulate as many growth assets as you possibly can whenever you can afford to accumulate them, and just hold. Like, it's the key thing that most people are waiting. Well, what happens if the market falls another 5 or 10%? And the problem is that we have this cycle of emotion that people always have. They have kind of buyer's remorse, or they end up sitting on the fence and missing the boat. And you've always better to be in the market than not, right? But I guess the key thing really that most investors need to be considering is, can they afford to hold long term? Because one of the big things is that the investors that do the best are the ones that can wait. If the market falls, it doesn't matter. It's just a paper loss. They haven't realized any losses. But for those who might be in financial hardship, maybe they've lost their job, maybe their business isn't doing too well, they might not have a choice. So when it comes to accumulating a property portfolio and I guess assessing your situation, where do you look at those cash flow considerations in terms of when you look at a property, of understanding what the out-of-pocket costs are to keep that property afloat when it comes to your research process, Rasti?
Sure. So I'll actually start with what is required for the individual. And I'm actually a big fan of buying a property for the capital growth.
Yeah.
It's a capital growth that gets us to the other side of our scale of richness or the wealth creation. But having said that, cash flow is very critical,
Sure.
because without financial leverage, we are only as good as our net wealth, right? So it's the leverage that makes a lot of difference and lots of amplification of the returns in the property. Just because, just by putting my 20% or even sometimes 10% or even lower,
Mm.
I can actually get the rest of the money from other people, which is called OPM in our, like, other people's money.
Other people's money. Love that. Fantastic.
So because the leverage is there, so we really have to be conscious, even from the purchase of our first property, that we have to be keep going with our purchase or acquisition stages.
Yeah.
Typically, we need at least 6 or more properties to make that wealth or financial freedom, just purely based on the property investments.
Sure.
People get stuck at after 1 or 2 or 3 properties because they didn't really thought about it, which is like financial strategy around it.
Makes sense.
So there are 2 aspects of it. One is that having a plan, like having a strategy, like what happens when I buy first, second, third, who's going to fund me fourth, fifth, and sixth, and beyond.
Makes
So
sense.
having that thinking, and then also to your point, like the cash flow, money going out of your pocket. Like I'm a big fan of money in my pocket because cash is always king.
Of course.
But then if I'm not really using the cash, I'd rather go and multiply it elsewhere, because at the end of the day, whether it is, as an example, 5,000 in my pocket or 10,000 in equity in my property investment portfolio, is still my money.
Of course.
So cash flow is important for the leverage, like a future leverage, and also my lifestyle.
Makes
I
sense.
don't really want to be in the boat of very asset rich person boat, but not really having cash in my pocket. So there has to be a fine balance. And we really need to cover our scenarios whereby if something happens wrong. So I would always advise people to have a proper buffer, maybe in their offset account,
Yep.
or otherwise, to just cover their scenarios. And to my point on that, Jackson, as you know, like property investing is just one investing. We really need to cover the other aspects of the risks, like thinking about insurances in place.
Yeah.
We are taking such a big liability of $1 million, for example.
Sure.
What happens to us, like to my family, like if something goes wrong to me? So we really need to pay a couple of percentage points just to cover the scenario, getting all the insurances, doing the research. That actually is in itself an insurance to the portfolio that we are building for future.
Definitely. Yeah, that risk management strategy is so important. And I think there's a few things that have changed over the years, Rusty, that many investors might not realize. And I guess back in the day, the borrowing rules were very different. And you could perpetually, as long as you had the equity, the bank would continue to lend you money. And you could build substantial property portfolios, assuming that your properties were just going up in value. However, with the new responsible lending, which is not new anymore, it's been around for many years, but just most people don't know about it, that the biggest consideration and the cap that most people have is their servicing capacity. And actually, every property you buy diminishes your debt ceiling for future borrowing.
That's right.
So I think the old strategy of just kind of having interest-only loans, never paying back a cent, waiting for them to all go up in value, unfortunately, that strategy doesn't work as well anymore. And I think you're right, that's where people get stuck. They buy one property, 2 properties, and then it all comes to a grinding halt. But I think you're right. The biggest risk here is the fear of the unknown. What happens if the wheels fall off? What happens if there's a tenant that trashes the property? What happens if you are out of a job for 3 or 6 months? What happens if you have a critical illness or an injury or an accident that stops you from working? All of those things can be catastrophic to achieving financial freedom.
Exactly right. And as we were speaking earlier, like it's not the destination by itself. It's just a mean to achieve our goal.
Yeah.
And it's never linear. Like there will be ups and downs. But the thing is that the person who would actually go through it easily or with less inconvenience is the one who is more prepared. As we call it, like if you fail to plan, you're actually planning to fail.
Yeah.
And it's so critical when we are talking about such a high leveraged ways of achieving that success. Exactly. So we have to be very careful. And to me, like people do a lot of research, when they're buying a washing machine, they would go $100,000 stuff, and they go crazy in terms of finding with their friends and family, looking at the models, going to Mars or whatnot, and they are so reluctant to involve the same level of diligence with a maybe like 1,000 times more of a value product,
Yeah.
just buying it like that. So that actually surprises me. Like, what basis you are doing that? Like, it's just beyond me somehow.
And look, this is why I advocate using a property buyer. Myself personally, I'd never buy a property again without a property buyer, because it's just one of those things. My motto is always you stick to what you know and you outsource everything else. Because it's so important.
Just on that point, like people say the biggest leverage in property investing is the financial leverage.
Hmm.
I kind of believe it until I realize there's a bigger leverage, and that's a leverage of skill, knowledge, expertise.
Correct.
So what financial leverage is doing, it's just multiplying whatever result we are going to get.
Yep.
But that result is positive, less positive or negative is a function of the research or the expertise behind it when it comes to the research. And the key thing, Jackson, if I can also add this, fundamental research, macros research, you can do at your own comfort zone on your couch, looking at the media, newspapers, websites, and whatnot. But when it comes to real estate, it's such a tangible product, asset, that you really have to be on the ground to understand the sentiment.
Sure.
Sometimes we lose the frame of context, in the sense that, like, if we are from Sydney looking at northern beaches, what property is going for, and then we go to the Western Sydney, for example, and we realize, oh, it's 800-meter block selling for this much. That's pretty good. It's the local knowledge. I mean, 100%. It's easy to appreciate this in the city context. What if we go to Queensland, Southeast Queensland? We go to a regional town, it's entirely different. So having someone at the local ground level understanding what the market is very, very critical.
100%. So, Rusty, we've covered quite a lot today, but what I'd like to do is summarize it into maybe 3 key takeaways or piece of advice. So if anybody's watching this, they're potentially looking to build wealth through property, whether it be buying their next property, buying their first property, what would be, say, 3 key insights that you could give them to help them make the right next decision?
Sure. I think the foremost important part is to have a strategy, have a end goal in mind, and work it accordingly. Second thing I would say is not every property is good for everyone. So there's a bit more of a subjectivity to your circumstances. So have someone like a financial planner or consultant's approach working with you for you. And the third one, I would say, yes, financial leverage is huge, because the knowledge leverage, always go for a professional who is doing this on a daily basis. The thing that I'd probably don't really touch based on this one is what an individual can find on the property market are the listed properties only.
Sure.
But there's almost 1/3 of the properties which actually goes without really hitting the market. And they are called off-market listings. You can only access them when you have a local contact in that area. And now that is a market which is so uncompetitive. And that's where, personally, I like to tap into all the time.
Fantastic. I love that, mate. Well, look, we shared some great value, Rusty. So if anyone's listening to this and they'd like to get in touch with you, how are they best to reach out? I'm a person available on phone all the time, but sometimes it's not really easy. So anyway, my phone number is 040-1022-724. I do have a website which has a booking page calendar as well, who can simply go and directly book my time, or like book time with me. It's a free obligation-free consultation, and in which we can just simply cover what we can talk about, what I can offer with my expertise, and primarily understanding what they can get out of me. So it's just more about understanding the process very quickly, and also the questions they should be asking with their professional helper in this regard. Fantastic, mate. Well, I'll include links to that below. Thank you, Rusty. It's been fantastic to pick your brain on property. You've shared some really valuable insights. So, guys, if you've been listening to this or watching this, if anything that we've spoken about resonates with you, please make sure that you do get professional advice. This is by far the most significant financial decision that you will ever make. So you need to make sure you invest the time, get the right advice, surround yourself with people that will teach you what they've learned and help you avoid making costly mistakes. Make sure that you get in touch with Rusty below if you're interested in having a conversation. Rusty, thanks again, mate. I really appreciate you making the time and looking forward to catching up again soon.
My pleasure, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.